Good afternoon, everyone. I still remember my myself, Dr. Anukujo Nuchenna. I want to welcome you once again to my YouTube channel. In today's class, we're going to be looking at something very simple, and that is hosts. After which, we'll look at the types of hosts and transmission of parasites between hosts. Now, when we talk about a host, remember when I defined parasitology, I said that parasitology can be defined as a study of parasites, their hosts, and the interrelationship that exists between them. So you cannot study a parasite without mentioning the host. As a matter of fact, there is no parasite without a host. What makes it a parasite is the fact that it is living in or on the body of another organism, and in this case, that organism is known as a host. So, a simple definition of host can be an organism that harbors a parasite. As simple as that. Any organism that harbors a parasite is known as the host. Don't forget that the parasite can be living in the host or can be living on the host. For instance, all the parasites, all the protozoa parasites, all the platyhelminthes parasites, all the nematode parasites, they are living in the host, in the body of the host. Then when it gets to arthropods, that is where you begin to see uh, hosts that, you begin to see parasites that live on the host. Sometimes most of them are temporal. On temporal basis, they just get to the host just for the purpose of feeding. After which they leave, like most of the vectors we know. Then we also have the head lice or the head louse, the Pediculus humanus capitis. It also lives on the body of the host. So that is what a host is. Then we'll now talk about the different types of hosts. We have about 4 different types of hosts. The first type of host is called definitive host. Definitive. We have the second one called the intermediate. Intermediate. How the third one called the reservoir host. Then we have the one called the paratenic. Sometimes people can include compromised hosts. So these are the different, however, the first 4 are the main types of hosts that we have. The first one is definitive host. Now, what is a definitive host? A definitive host is that host where the parasite develops into adult. Or you can also say that a definitive host is that host that harbors or captures the highest form of development of the parasite, or the host where the parasite becomes adult or reproduces sexually. A typical example is the case of mosquito and man. Most people think that mosquito is the intermediate host for plasmodium. No, mosquito is not the intermediate host because the parasite develops sexually, or undergoes sexual reproduction in mosquito. And for that reason, mosquito is not a definitive host. I know you are taught this in secondary school that mosquito is an intermediate host because it's a vector. It is not all vectors that are intermediate hosts. So in this case, because Plasmodium falciparum, uh, develops, undergoes sexual reproduction in mosquito. So in this case now, mosquito is a definitive host for Plasmodium falciparum. Now the second one is intermediate host. Now when you talk about intermediate host, you're talking about that host that harbors the asexual stage or whereby the parasite completes a certain part of its life cycle, and that is a sexual part of its life cycle. So any host whereby the parasite undergoes asexual reproduction, that kind of host is called intermediate host. Now, in the case of Plasmodium again, the intermediate host in this case is man, because in man, the parasite undergoes asexual reproduction, and this asexual reproduction is known as schizogony, and sporogony. These are multiple fission. Is an example of asexual reproduction. Don't forget that we talked about asexual types of asexual reproduction. We mentioned binary fission, we mentioned multiple fission, and budding and rest of them. So schizogony and sporogony are types of multiple fission. Multiple fission. Now the only difference between schizogony and sporogony is that schizogony occurs before syngamy or before sexual reproduction, but sporogony occurs after syngamy or sexual reproduction. So that is just the basic difference. Now, apart from these two, the third one is reservoir host. When we talk about reservoir host, we're talking about an infected host or infected organism that now serves as a source of infection to other susceptible hosts. So is like the name implies, is a reservoir host. This kind of host controls large amount of the parasite. Now from this host, other hosts could pick or yes pick the infection or get infected. Now in the case of trypanosoma, the reservoir host for trypanosoma is the antelope or buffalo. From this antelope or buffalo, then it is not transmitted to a man or any other organism. So that is what a reservoir host is. Now, in the case of parathenic, another name for parathenic is transport. Transport. So when we talk about parathenic host, we are talking about a transport host. So in this kind of host, there is no form of development that occurs in the parasite. The host just transfers the parasite from one location to the other. For instance, we have chicken. So more often than not, the host, this kind of host can now transfer the parasite where the definitive host can now take it up. So it's a transport host, as the name implies. It's a transport host. You see chicken, transporting Tozokara. So the transport host for Tozokara is chicken. So one peculiar thing you should understand about parathenic is that in that host, the parasite does not develop into another stage. It just remains at that particular stage, but the host can now transfer it from one place to the other. That is transport host. Then, of course, the last one is compromised host. Now, when the immune system of a host, is down or is low as a result of the presence of a particular disease, such as HIV, such as AIDS, then such hosts can be called compromised hosts. And of course, once a host is said to be compromised, or the immune system of the host is to be compromised, what it now does is that it now opens the body of the host to other opportunistic infections. So this is the few things we'll look at when it comes to hosts in parasitology. Now the second aspect of what I want to talk about today is transmission of parasites. How are parasites transmitted? We have three different ways through which parasites can be transmitted. Now the first one is passive. The first one is passive. The second one is active. Now, when we talk about passive transmission, we're talking about a situation whereby the egg, the host, sorry, picks up the egg or the larva of the parasite. For instance, in the case of man and entamoeba esoterica, if man now, is vegetable that is contaminated with the cyst of entamoeba esoterica, that kind of transmission is passive transmission. Then we also have a situation whereby an intermediate organism, a vector, now transmits the parasite into the host. So in this case now, a vector is transmitting the infective stage of the parasite into the host. So this kind of transmission is also passive transmission or falls under passive transmission. Now the last but not the least is active transmission. And in active transmission, what happens is that the parasite on its own, actively penetrates. Okay, I didn't give the example of the second aspect of passive transmission. Example is mosquito. Yes, mosquito and plasmodium, of course. What now happens is that mosquito being the vector now transmits the parasite into man, for instance, as a host. So vector is transmitting the parasite. Or in the case of entamoeba septica, that's the first example. Man is then feeding on a food substance that is contaminated with the cyst of the parasite. So these two are under passive transmission. So in the last one, which is active transmission, in this case, the parasite itself actively penetrates the host, not through any vector and not through the host taking up the cyst or the larval stage of the parasite. But in this case now, the parasite on its own actively penetrates the body of the host. You can see this in schistosoma. The Saccharia or schistosoma, when someone is swimming in water, discover that the Saccharia actively penetrates the body of the host. Now, you can also see it in the case of hookworm and Stylostoma duodenea and Cato americanus. You discover that in the case of hookworm, that the elytra, which is the infective stage, also actively penetrates the body of the host. Then another parasite you can also see it is the one we call a nematode parasite. Of course, you know that hookworm is a nematode parasite and Stylostoma duodenea and Cato americanus. Then another one is the one they call Strongyloides saccharides. So it's called as Strongyloides saccharides. The infected stage is L3, as usually find in the soil. It also actively penetrates the body of the host. So when the larval stage of the parasite is penetrating the host, that is active transmission. Then when the host is ingesting the cyst or the egg or the larva, or when the vector is transmitting the parasite, it is passive transmission. Once more, thank you for listening. I will stop the lesson for today here. Please share this video to all the medical students and biology students around Nigeria and around the world. Thank you once more. I remain my humble self, Dr. Uchenna. See you in my next class.